I didn't used to always love reading. In fact, at one point, I didn't read at all. I found myself being frustrated because I couldn't really understand the words. It was really hard for me, so I just avoided it. But somehow, books ended up changing my life. So this is my story of how it all happened. Hi, my name is Susan, and welcome to my channel, The Phoenix Library. Come in, have a seat, and sit down and chat with me. I do want to say just real quick, I am going to be touching on a lot of topics. We're going to be touching on a lot of hard stuff today and around this whole journey of mine. So if that's something that would be too hard for you to hear, then I want to make you aware of that now before I continue on. So just be aware that we're going to be touching on some topics that might be a little uncomfortable. So for the past, I would say for me, 30 years, I've been on this journey to read more consistently. And then somewhere along the way, it became so much more to me than just simply reading, more than just a hobby. Before I got into reading, I feel like in a way I was just going through the motions of life. I remember my sister was a big reader. She read all the time, and I remember never really being able to understand it. She had opportunities to go out and hang out with friends, and she never did. She always was at home with her books. And I remember thinking, I could never do that. Like, that could never be me. I was the kid that was always outdoors. Even if I was playing by myself, I was always outdoors. I remember just getting on my bike and then I would just ride circles around our entire park just over and over. And I would do that for like hours. I couldn't be stuck inside. And that concept for me, I couldn't fathom it. And I remember thinking that my sister was such a weirdo. Why sit and read a book and read about living when you could actually get out and be living? She was almost 3 years old when I was born. There's stories that I hear where she'd be sitting there holding me as an infant and she'd already be reading me full-on books. And at the time when I was telling this, I'm like, yeah, right, a 3-year-old reading, yeah, right. But now that I have a son of my own, he was reading Harry Potter at the age of 4. You know what, it can happen. But for me, reading wasn't like that, okay? It wasn't like I was like my sister where I just connected with reading right away. I connected with the words right away. No, it wasn't like that for me. Reading was frustrating. It was like trying to learn a new language when you're in your 40s. It was hard. I struggled not just with reading, but I struggled with writing too. I remember being in kindergarten and being embarrassed because we had our first assignment. I remember we were finger painting, and at the end of it, after we washed up, we were supposed to put our names on our paper and turn them in. You guys, I couldn't spell my name. And I distinctly remember being so embarrassed because I didn't know how to write my name. I didn't know how to spell my name. It was like a complete blank to me. And that's actually how I ended up meeting my, to this day, best friend in the whole entire world. We have been best friends since kindergarten. That's how I ended up meeting her. She actually signed my name for me and we were inseparable from then on out. Reading didn't come easy to me at all. And I think in some ways, the reason I wasn't a reader and I didn't read books wasn't because I hated books. I didn't understand books, but that was mainly because I never read books because I was too embarrassed to. I couldn't understand the words. So again, I spent a lot of time outside and, we didn't have cell phones back then and we had the Game Boy, but I just wasn't a huge fan of it. And then the Nintendo came out. I remember that being a thing for a while. So I'd play Nintendo and like Mario, so that was kind of fun, but we were limited on the amount of time we got to play. Eventually I got my own room and I got my own TV. And then that was really cool because then I got to watch TV shows, and so that opened like a whole new world for me too. But I still avoided books. Around the age of 10, it was when things really started to change for me. My parents were kind of like nomads and they like to travel a lot, like all over the States. And they wanted my sister and I to have a little bit more of a structure and stay at the same school and have the same friends. So we ended up living with our grandparents. But every once in a while, our parents would decide that they wanted to play parenting, even though they sucked at it. And so then my sister and I would end up staying with them for like a summer. It didn't happen very often, but I remember specifically being around the age of 10. We lived in this Airstream trailer and my dad had a thing against people and crowds. So we lived in this little Airstream trailer. There was 4 of us and like 2 giant dogs because they had German Shepherds. And we had a cat and a rabbit, and like all of us were staying in this little Airstream out in the middle of nowhere in the mountains, Montana. If any of you guys are from Montana, it was called the Highlight Reservoir. It was up past Four Corners, Montana, and we stayed there for like pretty much all summer. And I remember being bored out of my skull. I didn't have my bike. I didn't have my Nintendo. There was like a little small TV in the Airstream trailer. The only things to watch on there were my dad and what he could watch. At this point, things were starting to get pretty bad. My dad, he got in the wrong crowd, met the wrong people, and he found alcohol. And then from there, it just downgraded from there. And he became a mean drunk, and he was just horrible. Like at that point, it was just more of a yelling at my mom all the time and degrading her and yelling at me and my sister, always telling us how wrong we were, how we knew nothing. And I just remember it being a horrible time. And so my sister and I, we would always go out into the mountain areas and run around the trees and stuff, but you could only do that so much. And then it got to the point when my mom had to come find us, it would just put her in more trouble. So then it got to the point where we really didn't leave the area of the park too much so that they could easily find us, and then it made things easier on our mom. I was just bored out of my skull and I couldn't take it anymore. I was losing it. And that was when my sister loaned me one of her books. Now, I know I talk about Nora Roberts all the time and how she was one of the first authors I'd ever read. She was actually my second. I didn't know if I ever clarified that. She was the second author I ever read. The very first author I read was a Sandra Brown book. The title of the book was Texas Chase by Sandra Brown. The very first book I had read from front to back was a romance book, and it was a cowboy romance. So sometimes when you guys hear me talking about cowboy romance in my videos, you'll kind of understand my nostalgia a little bit, and I was hooked immediately. Yeah, I think some of it had to do with boredom, and I do remember that there was quite a few words in the book that I didn't understand what they meant, but I just moved on. And then as I was going along, as I was reading this book, I could start to kind of understand what the words were trying to mean, right? So like I may not know what the word itself was, but if you put it in a context of a sentence or even in the grand scope of the paragraph, you can kind of start to learn and understand what that word means, if that makes sense. But when I first picked it up, honestly, I wasn't expecting much from it. It just pure and utter boredom. I'm like, ugh, whatever. My sister, she's got all these books. I'm bored out of my head. Let's just do it. Let's just do it. But something about it just really pulled me in. It pulled me in a way that nothing else had ever done before. Movies and video games are fun and they can entertain you in the moment. But in a way, when you're watching a movie, it engages you and it pulls you in, but it doesn't really engage your imagination. I find that with a book, even when they're describing the character to you, you still have leeway with your imagination. Like for me, I don't like beards on guys, okay? So when a book describes a guy with a beard, okay, you know what? In my imagination, when I'm picturing him, I'm just thinking a light amount of stubble, right? It would be still considered a beard, but it's not like full on like Santa Claus, touching your gut beard, right? Or, a very short, very well-trimmed beard, so I can think about these things in my head and I can imagine them. These characters started being described and it felt in some ways, even though, yes, they already had a description, the guy had blonde hair, that's just the way it was, but I got to put in my own little details with that blonde hair, right? Like they would describe if it was short or long, but you know how many different short and long hair ideas that you can imagine in your mind? These characters, even though, yes, they were not my characters, this guy was Sandra Brown's character, right? But in a way, I felt like in part he was mine too, because I was building him up through my own imagination too. And he became a part of me. And that was something that I had never experienced before. And then from there, I just started reading a bunch of my sister's Sandra Brown books. She was also a fan of Sandra Brown, so I got to read several of hers. That was where my love of books came in. No matter how difficult of a time that we would be having, I would always have my books, and it was like an escape for me. I didn't hear the yelling. I didn't, I wasn't choking on the cigarette smoke because my dad smoked a lot and he always had the doors closed and the windows closed and you could barely see in there because the smoke was so thick. And, Honestly, still to this day, I struggle going into a store and passing by somebody who has cigarette smoke. Again, it's not their fault. I know that. It's just my lungs automatically want to close up, because when you stay in a space so small, literally having a hard time breathing because the smoke is so thick, it makes it difficult. And even after all these years, and it's been a long time, I still smell that smoke, and it's like my lungs automatically want to close up. All of that was made bearable because I had my books. I would be in one of these cowboy romances with this girl fighting with this guy, riding horses, going on all these adventures, and suddenly I couldn't smell the smoke. I couldn't feel the claustrophobia. I couldn't hear the shouting. I couldn't see the beer bottles everywhere. I was in my own world. I didn't think about wanting to go back to my grandparents, hating it there. It took me away from my life. It put me somewhere else where I felt safe, where I felt in control. Little by little, reading changed things in me. First off, it gave me something to look forward to every day. I didn't wake up dreading, oh yay, another day. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it because of all the reasons I've said before, but also my sister and I, during that summer, we grew closer because suddenly me and her had something that we could share together. Before, we were so different that we just didn't have much to talk about. But now suddenly we could talk together. I would read a book and then, or she would read a book and then she would let me read it. And then we would come together and we'd get to talk about it. And so when we weren't just reading books, we would spend hours talking about books, enjoying it. And you know what I found? Sitting there and talking with somebody else about these characters and these stories and these books, and then just discussing it together, was just as exciting as it was when I was reading the book. We would spend hours outside at the picnic table, just either reading or talking about what we were reading, which normally, because these were my sister's books, because like I said, I never bothered collecting them, and they were all rereads for her anyways. So, and she was so patient. So I'd be reading and then something would just irritate me and I would make a grunt and she'd ask me, it was like, oh, what part are you in? Is it the part that I think you're in? And then I would tell her my thoughts and she was very good about not giving spoilers, but she would engage with me and we just have the most incredible time. And it's the first time I can remember where me and her actually connected. But yeah, that's where I just started looking forward to my days, not just because of the reading, but because I would get to talk to my sister about it. It also helped me slow down and focus. I was a very active child, and with all of the anxieties and stuff that this stuff going on with our parents was causing, I was like, if I didn't move or do something, like I would have all these problems. And I started developing this habit where, those like hangnails or things that you would get on your fingers, I would sit there and I would pick and pick and pick and pick until I'd start bleeding. And it wasn't like I was consciously aware of it. It was just this anxiety tic that I was developing from all of my surroundings and everything that I was dealing with. I would get in trouble for it, but it wasn't like I was doing it on purpose. It's like I wasn't even realizing I was doing it. I was just doing it. When I picked up reading and started reading, I started noticing that got better. It didn't go away. In fact, I still get that way. And when I'm not wearing nails, I find that I do it more. My husband's given up trying to stop me. When we were first started dating, he'd see it and he'd always grab my hand or he'd try to tell me to stop. It took him a while to understand that it wasn't something that I was doing on purpose. And again, like I said, I've gone through therapy and I've gotten a lot better and I don't do it as much. Reading was the biggest focus for me. It changed this need to move, this restlessness in me, and it helped me focus in my spot, in my time, where I was at. Got rid of all that background noise. Everything that I was worrying about, everything I was stressing about was gone. And I was focused solely on this one FMC and this love she's feeling for this MMC and this back and forth between them. And I was like so invested in that I didn't feel the restlessness. I didn't feel the claustrophobia. I didn't feel the need to pick at my hands. I also feel like it helped me feel things more deeply, if that makes sense. In some ways, and I'm not saying this happens for everybody, but it did me. I started noticing emotions through the stories that I was reading that I started recognizing in myself that I had never really stopped to think about before. A main character girl would be experiencing certain things and someone's explaining it to her, or the author is trying to explain it to the reader, right? And then I started resonating with that. I was like, I would start thinking, oh my gosh, I do that too. The stories help me find myself in a way that I had never done before. As I was connecting with these characters, I was also connecting with myself in a way that made sense to me. And in a weird way, it made my life feel bigger because reading started a plethora of the things that I love and enjoy now. I didn't expect reading to change so much of my life. It changed my mindset. I started enjoying reading. Now, I mean, like when I stop and think about the person I am now versus the girl I was when I was 10 and I was just starting to read, I could read, like when I'm talking to my husband and I'm reading a small book, he's like, wow, how many pages is that? And I was like, it's like 300 pages. He's like, oh wow, you're gonna finish that in a day. And it's so true. I could finish a 300-page book in a day. And when I was 10, there's no way that that would have happened. It would have taken me forever to read 300 pages because I had to struggle through the words and trying to understand what it was that I was reading. And then that's just another thing. I'm to the point in my life that I can look at a book and I can read it and understand if it's a poor grammared book or not. Right? If it's been well published, if it's been well edited, I can tell the difference now because I have read so many books. I have learned so much through reading. It's changed my knowledge. Another thing reading changed that I wasn't expecting was my confidence. I had my very first outlet to let out my creativity. And that was where I learned that I love to create. I think I was 12 years old when I wrote my first book. It was a full book and it was an entire book. I called it The Big Adventure. And it was all about these two girl sisters. You're going to hear some similarities here who had crap parents. And so they took their horses and they decided that they were going to go and live with some friends, but their friends lived clear across the United States. And so they took their horses and they went on this big adventure. Oh, I had so much fun writing that book and the adventures that I put them through. Like I was constantly thinking about them all the time. I remember when I was living with my grandparents and we'd be driving to church or something, I would just be staring out the window at the roads and at the paths and the grass and stuff. And I could imagine my character on her horse running next to us in the grass as she's heading to her next town and her next adventure on their way to wherever it is that they were going. That book never did get published. When I was I think was almost 14 years old, I'd gotten in an argument with my grandma because my room was a disaster. And I remember her telling me that if I didn't clean my room, that she was going to come in with trash bags and throw everything that was on the floor away. I'm just thinking, yeah, whatever. Okay, whatever, Grandma, whatever you say. Didn't listen to her, hung out with my friends, came home, went to bed. Next day, went to school, came home. Everything on my floor had been thrown away, including the book that I wrote. And because I didn't have it on a computer, didn't have it on a thumb drive, it was gone forever. We lived in a trailer park. It's not like I could have just went to the trash can. There was a big, huge, like those apartment-sized garbage can things. It was gone. And so I remember being upset and I decided I was never going to write another book. But that didn't stop my creativity. I found other outlets. I learned how to crochet. I loved to draw. I started getting into nail polishes and stuff, and I was always decorating my nails like with different designs. So, I'd paint my nails and then I'd do little designs on them. I was learning new ways to do my hair, and even my clothing was starting to become kind of like an artistic thing for me. I realized that I really loved creating things from scratch. Reading was what started my whole path to all of this creativity that I love so much now. I feel like even how I talk now and express myself has something to do with my love for books too. I feel like I can express myself in a more open, better way. I'm not as closed off. I'm not as embarrassed about the life that I had. I feel that I can better share my stories. As I got older, my sister stopped going and staying with our parents. It was just me. They decided that they just wanted me. I was younger. I would go hang out with them sometimes for summer. Sometimes I would stay for a year. Things just got really bad. During my sophomore year of high school, I went and stayed with my parents, and they decided they wanted me to do my sophomore year of high school there. I came and I stayed with them, and that is where I met one of my other best friends, who's become another important part of my life, and why we ended up moving to a whole new state, because I wanted to be closer to her. But anyways, I had my books then, and honestly, if it wouldn't have been for my books, I don't think I would have survived at all. It was horrible. And I remember that being a really rough time. And so I remember that was where I did a lot a lot of reading. And luckily my mom, she understood that, and every time we would go into town, she would always pick me up new books, and she was a huge support of me having my books. I think mainly because as long as I had the books, I was out of the way, and my dad didn't notice me as much, and he would leave me alone. But that was when he started getting more violent with his alcoholism, and he never really took it out on my mom, but he did me a lot. We moved into town and stayed in a trailer park just so that I could go to school. He hated being in town, so I think it made him drink more, and then he blamed me for it, and so he would get more mean and more violent. It got really bad. At one point he tried to sell me off to one of his drinking buddies, and I managed to run away, and I hid, and I didn't come out until my mom, she was the only one that knew where my hiding place was. She found me and told me it was safe, that he was passed out and that he probably wouldn't remember anything. Again, I would fall to my books, and they were my escape, and they made me feel better, and they made me feel like I had some kind of control. And then probably a month after that incident, my dad and my mom got in this huge argument, and I got worried about her. And by this point, I knew exactly how to piss my dad off. And so in order to protect my mom, I took on his anger, and it got so bad that it put me in the hospital. My friend and her mom, her real dad, was trying to get custody over her, so her and her mom had to leave to go to Michigan to fight this court stuff. And I had called them right before they left, and I told them what happened. My grandpa was my dad's father, and I was worried that, as sweet as he was, I was afraid he wouldn't believe me because it was his baby son. And so I was afraid to tell him. And so I called my friend's mom instead, hoping that maybe I could stay with them for a little bit. At this point, I didn't know that they were leaving for Michigan. They ended up showing up at the hospital, and they saw what condition I was in, and my mom had released them, and they ended up taking me to Michigan. My mom got my dad to agree to let me go. It was supposed to be just for a couple weeks while they did some court stuff. In that time, we were gonna work up the courage to call my grandpa and have him come get me, because my friend's mom was not gonna allow me to be with my parents anymore. So we ended up being in Michigan longer than expected, and her mom started to worry about me being there, which makes sense. Legally wise, if my dad wanted to create a fit, he could say that they kidnapped me, because I'd been gone long. It could have created all this legal stuff. We finally got a hold of my grandpa, and he drove all the way from Oregon to Michigan. My sister was with him, and they picked up me and my kitten, because I'd gotten a kitten while I was in Michigan. He drove 3 days to come get me, and then we spent the day there. I got to say my goodbyes to my friend, and then we drove the 3 days back to Oregon. He didn't take me back to Wyoming. My friend's mom sat my grandpa down when he got there. She didn't want to tell him over the phone, and she was able to tell him what I was too afraid to tell him. She showed him pictures and evidence, and my grandpa refused to send me back there, and so I never did go back. That was the last time that I had ever lived with my parents. But all of that led me to my deep love for books, my deep understanding of books. I resonated so well with the characters. I didn't feel so alone, right? And I know this is crazy to say, because there's so many people out there with stories like mine, and even worse stories than mine. But I still felt like I was all alone, that I was the only one going through all of this horrible stuff. So when I read a book, I didn't feel so alone. I mean, because all of us book readers know that the authors put their FMCs through so much hell, and you wonder how they're going to get through it, how they're going to survive. And when I came back, that was when I started getting into fantasy. And it first started out with just fantasy. I read Harry Potter, I read Eragon, I read The Hunger Games, and Divergent. I read Divergent before I watched the movies. And Eragon was where Eragon and a little bit of Harry Potter was when I really started getting into the fantasy romance aspect, because there was Ginny and Harry, and then there was Eragon, and I can't think of the girl's name. It's been, because I read it when it first came out, but there was the elf girl. And so there was these hints of romance, but in with the fantasy. And then that's when I started getting into fantasy romance. And then I read Twilight. Yes, the sparkly vampires. And I was hooked. And I actually read Twilight out loud to my husband. It was a time between the both of us where we got to read together, where I read out loud to him. But that was when I started getting into the fantasy romance. And then I really started opening up from there. I feel like the fantasy romance, believe it or not, helped me open up about my life and all of my hardships. And I'll be honest, I'm seriously not going into every detail about the horrible things that I dealt with my dad. But I felt like that in part is what gave me courage to speak out about some of the things that happened to me. And I remember when I was 18, our church was helping another church that was struggling. And so they were bringing people in for like a vacation Bible school. And I got put in charge of the 6th graders. And there was a point where they had people who'd had struggles in their life come up and speak out and talk to people about the stuff that they had gone through. And I was asked if I'd be willing to speak out. So I did. There was a whole group of people there. It was the most afraid that I'd ever been. But I got up and I spoke up about everything that had happened. After that, I remember I was packing stuff up. We were getting ready to leave. And this 6th grader girl, she came up to me and she hugged me and then she just started crying. And I'll never forget it, you guys. And I'm going to tear up. I just know I am. I'm never going to forget her for the rest of my life because she hugged me and she told me that she had felt so alone, that she's going through the same things that I am, only it was with her mom, not her dad. And she felt so unloved. Like everything that I had felt growing up, through my story, I was able to help this little girl. And I still hear from her to this day. She's married. She's got 4 beautiful kids. And still to this day, she thanks me because she's told me that if she wouldn't have met me, she probably would have killed herself. All I did was get up and share a story, my story, that I felt compelled and brave enough to do because I read books, because the books helped me build a confidence that I needed to share. And through that, I was able to help her, and not just her. I have helped so many people along the way. So I'm not afraid to share my story anymore because we're not alone. Those of us who have been abused, we're not alone. We're not the only ones going through this pain. We are not the only ones that feel unloved. We are not the only ones that are hurting. I want people to know that they're loved and that they're special and they're going to do big things for themselves. Look at me now. My wonderful kids, my amazing husband. I am a cosplayer. I love to sew. I compete in competitions for it. I am writing a book, which honestly, I never thought I was going to ever write a book after The Big Adventure, but I am doing that. Now, I've been writing this book for a while. I will be honest. I still deal with nervousness and shyness. Writing a book is so raw. In cosplay, when you're doing competitions, like they get up in your business, okay? You are standing there and you got girls looking up your skirts, okay? Because they're looking at all of your seams, your hemlines. So I've never felt so exposed. But even despite all of that, I feel like getting my book out there for people to read is a whole new level of intensity. Like I've seen the way people criticize other authors in their books, and that scares me. Authors put so much of themselves into their books. So when someone's criticizing their book, at least for me, it'd feel like they're criticizing me. Not everybody's gonna like your stuff, and that doesn't mean that you're a bad writer or a bad person or that there's anything wrong with you. They just don't resonate with your book. I know all of that, but just something about letting my book go is still something that I'm struggling with, and my husband's trying to help me through it, but I'm just not ready yet. I feel like there'll be a time when I'm gonna wake up and I'm gonna look at my husband and I'm gonna go, okay, it's time. It's time. We need to just let it go. We just need to get it out there. But getting to today, reading had went from something that I felt like I needed to do to escape, to get away from my situation, to something now that I just want to do, something that I just enjoy. I love just sitting down, curled up on my couch, reading my book. I love to go outside. If it's sunny and it's nice, I will just lay in the grass and read a book. Maybe it's because of how I first started reading and I was reading outside a lot. It's just something about me reading outside that I find a comfort. Reading's not something that I feel like I need to do anymore for support. I have plenty of that. I have lots of friends. I have my own family. I created my own family. There's a woman who's kind of adopted me. Her and her son, who's I consider my big brother. They may not be blood, but they are my family. They're the family that I created. They have helped take care of me. They've been amazing. She's been an amazing grandma to my kids. He's been an amazing uncle to my kids. So I've got my family. I've got my support system. I have my friends. I have an amazing husband who's not just my soulmate, but he's my best friend. I've got my kids and my animals, and I feel so lucky and so blessed. So I don't feel like I have to read the way I did a long time ago. Now reading is just a pleasure. It's just something I want to do, something I enjoy, something I love. And you know, honestly, I couldn't even imagine myself ever going back to that girl that I was before I started reading. I couldn't even imagine that. So I guess the last that I have to say is, if you've thought about reading, I say do it. If you feel stuck, unmotivated, or maybe just kind of disconnected, I genuinely believe that reading would help with that. You would be amazed by what reading can do in your life, the things that it can change in your life. This girl who went from being horrible at reading and writing to being really good at it, all just from reading. I mean, and I'm not saying that books are going to fix everything. Obviously, they're not. I still have anxieties. I still have my issues that I have to work out. I'm not saying that books fix everything. They don't fix everything, but given a chance, they might change more than you would expect. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know I got a little personal. I just really wanted to share with you guys why this is also important to me, why I talk about books so much, why I love them, why I decided to create this channel. Because just like all those years ago when I was 10 and I was talking about books with my sister, this kind of brings me that same kind of love and joy. Not just the reading of the books, but talking about the books, expressing my love for books, and maybe helping some people find books. Since I started watching BookTube, I have found a lot of amazing books that I didn't even know existed if it wouldn't have been for BookTube. If I can help somebody find amazing books like what I have found, or find some kindred spirits and make some new book friends that we can just geek out on books, then I'm as happy as a clam. So if you're on a reading journey at all, I'd like to hear about what kind of journey you're going on down in the comments below. I would love to hear your story and your journey with books. And if you want to follow mine, I'm currently working towards reading 100 books this year. So you can definitely stick around for that. I'll see you guys in my next video.